Everybody, boy, I got a smooth dude on the channel today. Oh my God, I've known this guy for a few years, my friends, and I've always admired him. But let me tell you what happened was I was in the supermarket. Let me tell you how I do my thing, right? And I tell everybody what I'm doing because that's, I got to let them know so that they can get some of this good Black history that I'm sharing via the guests that come on Strong Inspirations. And I got to talking to him because I hadn't seen him in a while. The world is topsy-turvy with the virus just, let's say, coming to an end. And we got to talking, and he told me a little bit about what he is doing. And I said, brother, please come on my show. And he was like, yeah. And if I hadn't said I'm Anthony Brogdon, I'm the guy I'm an ordinary guy doing some extraordinary things. Watch out, my friends. And this show is one of them. And I'm super excited today to have this gentleman on my show because he's got a story that very few people talk about. You're going to be enlightened beyond your imagination as we go forward. Now, I've been doing it for a little more, almost 3 years now. We got a lot of videos, so scroll through and look at some of them other ones. Go down the video list, go through the homepage, because not that we only have Frederick Douglass's 3-time great-grandson on the show, Madam C.J. Walker's 2-time great-granddaughter, Ida B. Wells' 2-time great-grandson. But how about this? We got a lady who writes about the trauma that Black women have gone through since slavery. Watch that video. We have the guy who owns the oldest Black-owned business in America. It was owned by a guy who was once enslaved back in the 1800s. He did it as a horse and buggy carriage transportation company. Now they are in the trucking business out of Columbus, Ohio. Watch that video. How about this one? Did you see the one I did with the guy who he found out, and he was close to him at one point, that his great-grandfather was in the KKK and killed a Black man? And he wrote a book about it? Watch that video. Oh, man, I'm coming at, we got him from out of Africa. I got a guy on the show who out of South Africa, lighter complected brother, right? He said, they call me colored over here, and I still got no rights. And he lived through apartheid. He tells the inside scoop on that. Watch that video. And I'm going to keep coming at you. Now, let me tell you some more stuff, my friends. You might know that I am a filmmaker. Well, this is one of the films I've done. It's titled Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America, because no one told me that there were enslaved Black folks who owned businesses. I had never heard that. That would have blew my mind. And when I stumbled across that fact, I did more research, and that led me to do this documentary. It is streaming on Amazon. I invite you to watch it. That led me to write a book about it because I follow up on all my stuff. And this is my book. Somebody, and it wasn't just one, and I like this, it is America's #1 Black business history book on the market. Boom, shakalaka, here it is. And I am so confident that you will learn something new when you read my book, that if you don't, send me a message. You ain't got to send me the book back, and I will refund your money. A book with a money-back guarantee, my friends, that's it there. You're not going to find nothing that gives you what I give you in this book so succinctly. All right? Get you a copy of this. And what happens is, because I was never taught this kind of facts, I believe that they're not teaching it in school. And you know what they're doing down in some of them states where they trying to limit what they talk about. So what I do is, for every 10th book that I sell, I donate one to a school. So you help me, I help them. You help me, I help you when you learn after you have read this book. Now, I'm taking it one step further, my friends. I'm getting to my guest. He's sitting there waiting patiently. Oh, man, he waiting too. Let me tell you, he got it on his heart. He want to tell you this stuff. That I'm so confident in my book that I wrote it, when I wrote a stage play adapted from the book. And it was sold out, my friends. It happened a few months ago, June, 2023. And as a result, I'm taking it to the next level. And I got a movie coming out. We're in the last days of filming, maybe 1 or 2 more days left. It's based on the book, which is then also a part of the play. I featured 12 rich Black people. Some of them lived in the 1800s. And it's in a, you're gonna like the way I present this. It ain't just them standing there saying this is what I did in my life. It's comical in many respects, and then it's serious in many respects. And the actors really bring these folks to life. Now, there's always a little fundraiser, so to speak, in this movie game. And if you incline, you can get your name in the film. It's called My Patron Ad, and it would be under the supporter category. So I ain't gonna tell you how much, but it's very reasonable. You go to my website for all that I do, businessintheblack.net. Get your name in this film. You can put your parents' name, your name, your family's name, your kids' name, your church name, your business name. I can't accept website though. Your fraternity name. I don't care, but get it in there and as a show of support to be a part of this that's going down in history. And when I release it, I'm having a premiere in several cities, and other cities will be able to show it. But we're also going to have it up on some of them streaming services. So it will be seen around America easily, and I'm looking to do it internationally. They got to hear these facts. It has become my mission. It is a movement under this umbrella of strong. And as I use that word strong, I want you to know that strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to the strong brother on the show, Dave. Come on, man, introduce yourself. Let's get it on.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Peter Banks, and I am just so proud and inspired that Anthony Brogdon asked me to be on the program to talk about some of the things that he mentioned, which is a history that's never mentioned or they're trying to bury about our contributions to this wonderful country of ours, more or less. And so the book I wrote is called No Medals.
Okay, hold on. Let me, before you go too far, I got to do this with you. I do it with all my guests. I want my people to get to know you just a tad. So now, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. My parents we all came from down south, and but I was raised in Detroit. My dad came north because there was an opportunity back in the 50s, in the mid to late 50s, when they built the post office down on 4th Street downtown, because everybody was moving to the Detroit area because of the auto industry.
Yeah,
Ford, right. GM, Chrysler, all of the companies that had to do with the auto industry. So there's the plastic industry, the rubber industry, the electronics industry, trucking industry, supply chain. So he moved to Detroit to work in the post office.
Okay.
And he had an uncle here. My grandmother's brother lived in Detroit on the west side. That's how I ended up in Detroit.
Let me ask you this. Now, going back in Atlanta, did you live in the Black neighborhood and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I lived on the west side. Matter of fact, my dad went to Morris Brown College, which is now part of Atlanta University. He pledged Phi Beta Sigma back in the day.
Yeah.
My mother was from down there. Most of my family, everybody was down there. Scottsdale, Georgia, which is out near Stone Mountain. My dad's brother lived out in that area, right off Peachtree. Peachtree Lane, Peachtree Avenue, Peachtree Street.
Yes.
So that's where I came from.
Let me ask you this. Did you have any interaction with white people growing up?
Yes and no. My family was my mother's side. They were domestics, which is they cleaned the white folks' houses and did all of that. But it was limited. It was very limited. My introduction to dealing with white folks was learning about the police, which at that time were totally segregated, and also going to Catholic school. My parents saved up the money and paid tuition because at that time, private school was considered the best opportunity for education. So I ended up going to Catholic school, but I was raised AME, African Methodist Episcopal, and Baptist.
Okay. Let me ask you this now. Did you hear of Dr. King and what was happening on Auburn Avenue
Yeah,
and
as a
the
matter of
racial
fact,
strife?
my father went to school with Dr. King.
Oh,
As a
really?
matter of fact, they didn't call him Martin Luther, they called him ML. So if you said ML to Martin Luther King, he knew you were from home. And the first
Okay.
time I knew about that is when they had the march, I Am a Man march in Detroit, way back in the early 60s. My
Yeah.
father was there and he said, "Watch this." He yelled across the crowd. There were all of the people from the unions and stuff,
Yeah.
and Martin Luther King turned around and said, "Wait a minute, home is here." So my father went to school. He was one or two grades in front of him, but of course
Yeah.
the school was small, so he knew him. So yeah,
Yeah.
I had a definite personal connection through my father to Atlanta and Martin Luther King.
Have you ever seen KKK?
I've never seen KKK. I only saw uh, the results of some of the things that happened when I was growing up. My father and my mother would tell us there were certain things you could not do and should not do. Because if you got picked up by the police, chances are you were not coming home. So they would go and walk over to your house and say if you were arrested, because they didn't know if you were coming back. In those days, they would beat you. Well, these days they would beat you
Yeah.
while you were in custody. But no,
Yeah.
I didn't see any KKK. But where I lived, there were still segregated um, burial grounds, segregated cemeteries.
Yeah.
So in those days, which were the late 50s, early 60s, it was still segregated housing, still segregated. The only reason we got a house or my dad got a house is because of the GI Bill, where that you were able to buy. Before that, everybody either rented or stayed with relatives.
Oh, well, let me ask you just a couple more. So, what was your impression of white people? Did you think they were better than you?
Well, at that time, I didn't know much about it. I think the only thing that I was told was that I should be wary and that I should not ever really trust because you never knew how they were going to treat you. So
Yeah.
my bringing was one of always kind of watching with a jaundiced eye,
Yeah.
and but my education probably was different than most because most of my education was with white priests, white nuns, white teachers, and
Oh.
the vast majority of my classes, maybe there might have been four blacks, four minorities, four Negroes in my whole class.
Oh.
So, but I did see where sometimes you couldn't be you were never invited over to their houses.
Yes.
They didn't come to your house,
Yeah.
but you had classes.
Did you? So just a couple more because this is good stuff. What was your impression when you left? And you tell us how old you were. Your impression of when you left Atlanta and you going to the big city, Detroit. Did Detroit scare you as a big city? What was that
Well,
like
I
for
didn't
you?
know what to expect, but I did see some things like we took the train up from Atlanta. And I recall when we were coming through some of those smaller towns, trains got to slow down to take on, other passengers
Yeah,
or
yeah.
luggage or cargo. But there were certain areas as we came north where we had to pull the curtains on the train
Oh, really?
because they didn't want the people to see that they had blacks on the train because they said they would shoot into the train. So I had to be 5 or 6 years old, and that was my first understanding of
Who
what it
told
was
you
like.
that? Who told y'all that?
My father told me that. He said, close the curtains because we don't want them shooting in the train because, the backlight if it's dark, the backlight, you can see everything in. It's like
Yeah.
at night at home.
Yes.
You have the
Yes.
lights on at home. You can't
Yes.
see out, but they can see in.
Yes.
So that was my favorite. That was kind of scary to think, well, why would they want to shoot us? So,
Yes.
but they're coming through Kentucky and Tennessee. We had to pull the curtains at night.
Yes. Oh
That
man.
was my first introduction. And then
Now,
moving to the west side, it was kind of difficult because we were some of the first minorities. I think we were like the fourth set of blacks to move onto our street on the west side of Detroit, where we were.
oh, okay. So now this goes in, and you kind of alluded to this earlier about the book, No Medals and stuff like that. Your dad was in the service. What service? What branch was he in, and what did he tell you about that experience?
Well, my dad was in the Army. And those days, I was during World War II. So he was like 17, 18 years old. And in those days, everybody joined because of several reasons, which was out of patriotic pride or an opportunity to get some money, education, a job, or to show that Black men were just as brave as white men were. So he told me that was why all the Black men joined, but that wasn't why he joined. And in the book, I talk about the fact that it was surprising to learn that the reason why he joined had nothing to do with patriotic duty. Come to find out, he was dating somebody in the old Black church down south, and it was a betrayal. And it was so mean and so mean spirited and so embarrassing that he left the church, he left God, and joined the Army because he just couldn't face the people at the church. So I talk about that in the
Was it a
book.
white woman?
No, one, a white woman.
Oh.
The white woman. Basically, I can tell you that he found out that his girlfriend that he was betrothed to, going to get married to, the love of his heart, was cheating on him. But who she was cheating on with, that's what's so embarrassing.
And so he said, I got to go to the service.
I got to go to the service. I can't even show my face in that church.
Oh, I see. So now, as you alluded to, a lot of Black guys were going in, and they were going in under segregated situations, even in the service. Tell us more, and
the
let's go
entire
into the book.
service in the 40s during World War II, which was from 1941 to 1945, it was segregated, and they had segregated units. So they had segregated Army, they were segregated in the Navy, and they were given mostly jobs that were support. Like, for example, in the Army, they were in the engineering division, they were in the transportation division, where they would provide supplies like food, water, medicine, ammunition to the front lines. As a matter of fact, they had a name for themselves called the Red Ball Express, where they drove 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 30 days a month. And from what I understand, they had the lowest number of accidents or problems in World War II driving those things. So they didn't let them fight, but they let them do that. So my dad was in the Army. So he had background because he went to Morris Brown College. He had background in college, so he could read, he could write, he could type. So they made him a clerical person for the unit. He was in the Third Army. Now, the Third Army, if you look at the front of the book, it's got a triple A. I mean, 3 colors, red, white, blue, for the Third Army. That was the Army that Patton was in. So he was assigned to a regiment or a division with the Patton's Army. They had an artillery division, they had a support division, and they had a tank division. So he was with the tankers, and then he got transferred. He was trained to go to the Pacific, and then something happened while he was down south, and he got transferred and went to Europe. So he was in the Army. There was something called the Army Air Corps. There was no Air Force at that time. That changed later on after the war. But he was not a Tuskegee Airman. So when I went to try and find information about some of the stories that I heard, and I heard them from my older brothers and a few things from him, that's what I found out that there was no, when people ask me, was he in the Tuskegee Airmen? No, he was not. He was in the regular Army, but they also had opportunities to do things that would exhibit bravery. So I had to find out what did you have to do And why is it if my brothers and my father told me stories about
Right.
things that he did, how come he didn't get a medal?
Right.
You know, so
Right.
that had to do with, discrimination and social ignorance and the way that they just did things in the 40s. Okay. If you did something that would be considered brave, it had to be written up by a commanding officer. All the commanding officers were white. So they would never write anything in an official recognition to say that you, as a black person, did something brave. They call it a critical incident. That was the name for, say, if you did something to save a life or whatever you did, they call it a critical incident. That's just something that happens in the war. So
Oh,
that's why most of the guys, when they came back, black or white, they didn't talk too much about it. Because let's say you lost a hand, well, he lost a leg, or you lost a leg, he lost two legs. So you couldn't really compare apples to oranges in terms of
sure.
bravery. So instead, for blacks, whatever you did, that was just your job. So when
Oh,
I looked at it and then I compared the definitions, the criteria, the regulations, the rules, the policies, the procedures as to how you get a medal, in the book, I tell 5 stories. And then you get to determine, based upon the criteria, whether or not he should have got a medal back then in 1944-45, or he should have gotten one later on when President Clinton said, hey, there's a lot of lost and stolen valor. We need to uncover those stories and start giving medals to those guys. And it started out in 1999 with
okay.
President Clinton. He said, hey, we got to find these Tuskegee Airmen, because right now, most of the guys from World War II are, if they're alive, they're in their mid to late 90s.
Yeah,
So
sure.
we probably only got maybe another 4 or 5 years before they're all dead,
Yeah,
white or
sure.
black. They're
Sure.
going to be gone. So if you know somebody that's uh, that is a World War II veteran, like a Montfort Marine or something like that, then you have to talk to them now, because those stories about what happened are going to be lost.
Let me back up here just a tad, and we're gonna stay on this story, but this came to mind. So you say in the 1940s, what was the conditions for black folks like your dad in America? And were the conditions, was this a relief for them? Or you know what I'm saying?
Well,
What's the
from
dynamic
the
between the two?
conditions were, most people came north to work in the factories in Pennsylvania, the steel factories. They worked in the coal mines of Kentucky, Pennsylvania, or they came north to work in Michigan, Ohio,
Yeah, sure.
Indiana, Illinois, to work in the auto industry. So they were starting out at $5 a day, which was a lot of money back then. And then Henry Ford said he didn't care who you were, just come and work. And then you got paid every Friday. That was unheard of. So they left the farms
Yeah,
in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas to come north to Michigan to work.
yes.
And then that's how the city of Detroit grew from
Yeah,
a
sure.
couple 100,000 to 2 or 3 million over about 5 years. And my
Well,
father didn't want to work in the plants. He worked for the post office because
right.
everybody had mail.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this: what was there a special recruiting effort of blacks? Did they like set up shops to recruit
Yeah,
them?
they had posters. As a matter of fact, in the book, I talk about the poster that became famous, where it had Uncle Sam pointing at you saying, "I want you."
Yes,
So you
I've
saw
seen
this
that.
poster, it said, "I want you." Then people would sign up because it was a chance to travel. It was a chance to get the benefits that you get after. And if you were lucky enough, you might end up becoming an officer or get some training. Many of the guys that went into the Army worked in as I mentioned earlier, the
Yeah,
engineering corps.
yeah, yeah,
So
sure.
they learned about plumbing, electrical, bridge building, uh,
Okay.
you know, road building. So when they came back with all these skills. The problem was the white unions wouldn't let them join.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
that's how they end up either in education, teaching school,
Yeah,
or doing the garbage details and trucking details, because they weren't allowed to be in the unions where they have a union card to drive the trucks or to work in the houses, and people didn't want black people in their house
Yeah, sure,
working.
sure. Yeah. Let me ask you this question. So now you say that they get recruited, they go overseas. Are there and they're in segregated segments? Do they work alongside white people in some respects?
They were commanded by white lieutenants, captains, majors, maybe a one-star general, but no, they worked pretty much alone with white supervision. So they, like I said, they drove trucks, they dug
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
refrigerators,
Okay.
all those kinds of things, but they didn't work alongside them. They had segregated units that were autonomous.
It's funny that this is the discrimination that they had. They didn't want the black people to fight, which meant that a lot of them didn't lose their lives in the service. Is that the case?
That's true. A lot of them didn't lose their lives, but at the same time, because of that, as I get further down into the end of the book, once the war was over, they had a repatriation act, which meant that the military, the government said, well, we got like 6 million guys overseas, okay, either in the European theater or in the Pacific theater. Now they all got to come back. How do you get those people home? So they had something called an adjusted service rating card, which meant there were 4 or 5 criteria that they used to determine if you are going to get back and when you're going to get back. Okay. Because it took them the better part of 4 years to get that many men over there. Now, at the end of the war, they all want to get back home at the same time. So the adjusted service rating card said, for example, that the criteria was how many years were you in the service? So you had points. So most of the blacks were in the tail end of getting in. So they didn't have 4, 5, 6, 10 years. So they didn't get a lot of points for that. Another criteria was, were you married or did you have children? Most of them weren't married and have children, so they weren't able to come back for that. Were you wounded? The first people who were actually sent back were the wounded. So they weren't wounded, so you didn't get any points for that. The other criteria was, let's see, after wounded, it was whether or not you had any medals for serving. They didn't have that. So in the book, I talk about how my father figured out a way to get home without being married, without kids, without being wounded, without having 4 or 5 years in the service, because you had to fill out this we call adjusted service rating.
Yeah. Okay.
So he figured out a way to get back before white guys, other black guys, and as a matter of fact, they had German prisoners who were in the United States. They were out in California, out in the Dakotas, out in Oregon, and they were able to go in town and watch movies, but black soldiers who were guarding them were not able to. They were not able to go in town because of segregation at that time. So the German soldiers or Italian soldiers that were taken prisoner and shipped to the United States in prison camps here, they got back home before the black soldiers got back home.
Oh my God.
Sure did. And they had war brides. The white guys, when they got to England or they were in France, they married women over there. So the soldiers were shipped back, but then they had to have troop ships. They had those cargo ships that shipped them over. They shipped the war brides back to the United States before they shipped the black soldiers home.
This is another one, and I don't remember the exact story, but I know when we talked in the supermarket, you said there was some little known fact about black soldiers and the achievements that they are. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, a lot of it had to do with, as I mentioned before, somebody actually writing it down, somebody actually recording what happened. So when I started to do research as to where do you get the information on this? Well, you have to have a document called a DD-214, which is when you leave the service, it's a document that says you served from this state to this state. This is the unit that you were in. And this is what you did. It's a background record, like when you leave school. What did you do? How long were you there? What was your training? Well, what most people don't know is in 1971, there was a huge fire and a ton of the records got burned.
Mm.
So there was no record of what a lot of these blacks did because the indexes where they were in World War II were burned. They didn't have microfiche, they didn't have computers, they
Yes.
didn't have
Sure.
any of those things at that time. So these records were permanently burned. So when I went to request the records for my father, because I found this exit document when he left the service behind a, in a Bible or behind a picture, like how we used to do in the day. You want to
Yeah.
keep it safe, you put it in the Bible,
Sure.
or you put it behind a picture frame in the home to keep it safe. Well, I found this document and the Army Archives requested a copy of that because they knew who he was from the Social Security number, but they had no record of it because it had gotten burned.
No.
So from 1971. So when you start to search, you might find out that your loved one or your relative, there may not be a record because of this huge fire. So there were all kinds of conspiracy theories about whether or not the government did it, or whether or not they were trying to hide some facts about the Vietnam War because that was going on, or whether or not the technology at the time did not protect the records. After that huge fire, the government changed the rules about building. Okay, now you can't have a building without fire suppression systems,
Sure. Sure.
coverings on the construction parts so they don't catch fire. But at that time, you just built the building.
Yeah. Sure. Let me
So
let
they
me let me
lost.
let me go. And I know I'm jumping around. These questions come to mind. What did he tell you about his experience being overseas?
Well, he told me that one, you couldn't go in town because they thought that black men had tails and they didn't want to mix in with the white girls. So they were not allowed off the base. They couldn't get time for R&R, rest and relaxation. They couldn't go in for a Coca-Cola or a beer. He also said that a lot of times the white supervisors commanding officers would blame them for things or make them do a lot of heavy duty tasks and would never give them the credit for it or wouldn't give them the extra pay. I found out when I took a picture, I found this picture, that's the picture of my father on the front of the book behind me. If you look at that picture closely, you'll see an armband on it,
Yeah.
2 stripes.
Right.
Okay. He was an acting corporal. When I went around the country and started talking to people, black folks, some of them had that armband on, acting corporal, acting sergeant. What that meant was they gave you the responsibility, but not to pay. If you messed up or they perceived you to mess up, they just took the armband off you and gave it to somebody else. So the question was, how much money did all of these black soldiers miss out on because they were made to do the job without getting the actual written credit for what they did?
And the money. Yeah, and the money.
And the money.
And the money. What if you in your research, when did things start getting better for blacks in the service?
Well, the research showed that after World War II, President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, President Clinton, they started to change and change in the 50s, where they unsegregated the Army, and then it was merit-based, where you could test in to the various departments. After the Tuskegee Airmen did what they did, they had the highest rating for protecting B-17 bombers, B-24s, going to and from their bases in England or Italy. And they were the first time they could fly, they had wing tanks, so they could fly protection, fighter pilot protection from the base all the way to where the bombing site and back. Before they had to leave them because they had to turn back, they didn't have enough fuel. But after they built the P-51D Mustang, they had fuel tanks and they could fly them 1,600 miles. So most of the bombing runs were 800, 900 miles. So they could fly to and back, and they could fly at a higher altitude because the B-17s could only fly like 200 or 300 miles an hour,
Mm.
maybe about 200 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And the fighters could go 300 miles an hour, so they could drop down out of the clouds and protect the bombers.
Yeah. Here's another one question. When they returned from the service, was there fanfare for them of any sort?
No, I mean there were in your families.
Yes.
My dad talked about uh, going to the VFW halls. They didn't have them like the white guys had them, where they were built from scratch. They might have had the church social hall or something like that, and they had weddings and situations of where they would play cards, and it developed that thing where they had those organizations where they had those coming out parties for the daughters and things like that.
Okay.
So, but no, there were no parades, there were no fanfare, anything like that. Most of the guys, when they returned home, they didn't talk about what happened. They just wanted to get a job and get married and have a family and put that discrimination and that situation behind them. Most of them had been between a year and 3 years, without ever getting home.
Oh, really? So what was the fanfare for the white officers? Was that ticket tape
Well,
parade, all that
they
kind
had
of stuff?
parades in their towns. They had a monument set up in the town square with the names of
Yep.
the
Yep.
people who were either in the service or the ones that were lost. They appeared in the local newspaper saying so and so is back and who was lost. And they had parties through what they call the local canteens, which were like the places they could go to meet girls and dance and have a cup of coffee, a donut, or
Yeah.
have a drink and smoke a
Yeah.
cigarette.
Yeah.
Back in those days. So they had that. We had some of those things, but nothing to the extent of that. Most people, if they did anything, they were able to come back to their local church and they had a little something.
Is there, as we almost come to a close, let's say, is there an example in your research of a black guy doing something extraordinary though?
Yeah, I
Let's
have
cite some
pictures.
of those.
Yeah, there were a few soldiers that did receive commendations and medals for what they did. But that was I have some pictures from World War II where even General George Patton awarded some black soldiers, but they had to do something way above and beyond in order to get it. And again, once you have the criteria for the type of medal, you have a Bronze Star, you have a Silver Star, you have a Purple Heart. That's if you get wounded. You get a Purple Heart. You get a commendation medal. There's there's a number of medals depending upon what service you're in. But mostly, blacks did not have opportunity to get those because they weren't on the front lines. They weren't asked to do that. Now that changed in Korea. That changed in Vietnam. That changed in all the other actions that they've had, all the way up to Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and all those kinds of things. But that didn't really change until really the 70s.
Really?
Early 70s, early to mid 70s.
Do you know of any black guy being right there beside Patton or whoever the main general was? Is there such a guy that people recognize? He didn't get the award, but we know that man right there was right beside them, right beside
I
the
don't
big
know.
generals.
I can't say if I know of anything like that. I do know that in my dad's case, he was assigned to become a driver. Okay. So he drove the majors and the captains and lieutenants and stuff like that because my father spoke French and German, which I didn't know was different because they wouldn't allow them to come into town. He was really bright and he would listen because even in France and Germany, he picked it up just like you can, like anything else. He was real
Yeah,
bright.
I love it.
So he spoke French and German. So when the white administrators, white captains and lieutenants found out, they made him the driver. That was why he had that armband that said acting corporal so that he could drive. So what would happen is they would go to the townspeople or the acting adjutants of the control for the towns because they still had to use the people to operate the towns while they were being transitioned from Nazi or German control. And so they would talk to him in French or German, and my father would interpret. They'd turn around on my dad and say, "What'd he say? What'd he say? What'd he say?" My father
Yeah.
would interpret. So I didn't know that that was different growing up. In my home, my father spoke French and German. So if I
Oh, I
messed
love
up
it.
really bad, I didn't do
Yes.
my homework or whatever, he'd
Yeah.
come over, he'd mad because German is a very aggressive language. Ich bin ein Schwein und achte lieber. So my
Yes, I
mother,
love it.
right? So my mother would jump in between us and say,
Yeah.
"Oh, listen, do the rake the leaves, do the lawn, mop
Yeah.
the kitchen. Your father's talking in German, and he's mad at you."
Oh, I got it. I got it.
He said he called you dirty pig. I heard him say Schweinhund.
Yeah.
So, but then on Friday nights, and I talk about Friday nights when he got a little paycheck from the post office. I see him in the kitchen. We're out in the living room watching. We had the one TV, had to kind of vote on what you want to see.
Yeah.
And he's in the kitchen and he's in there talking to my mother, kind of rubbing on her, as a young black man, you don't want nobody touching your mother, that's your
Yeah.
mama, she's
Yeah.
a saint, she's an angel.
Yeah.
And she's laughing and giggling. And I hear him in there, and then my mother would come outside, she'd be wiping a dish or something. And she'd come out the kitchen and say, now, you children play nice downstairs because your father and I go upstairs and have a discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got it. I love it. I love it. I love
You
it.
know
I
what I'm
love
saying?
it.
So as a kid, I did not know
I
what
love
that
it.
meant. But what it taught me is that they found a way in a house full of children without any money to share intimacy, to share romance.
I love it.
Okay. Because that was one of the things he talked about. He said, if I ever get out of the army, when I come back, I'm going to have me a wife. I'm going to have me some kids. I'm going to have a job. I'm going to take care of my kids. I'm going to love my wife. So they were married for 45 years,
I
which
love
is
it. Is there a question about the book? How long did it take you to write it?
a good
That
question.
kind of thing.
That book, it actually, off and on, I wrote it for 10 years.
Oh, really?
I mean, I'd never written a book before. And it was sort of like something that kind of wrote. And then one day I decided I was going to just really get into it. I didn't tell anybody I was writing a book because sometimes when you write, people all, here come the naysayer. What are you writing about? When it's
Sure,
going to be
sure,
done?
sure.
All this kind of thing. What are you
Sure.
going to do with it? So I wrote it and I put it in a 3-ring binder. I printed it out and I showed it to my mother. And I said, you need to look at this. I've been kind of noodling around with this. And she read it in a couple of days. She said, son, this is really interesting. So many things in there that I had no idea. I didn't know about your father. I didn't know about the service. I didn't know about this. What are you going to do with this? I said, I don't know. It's not quite done yet. It was about 95% done. And she kind of looked at me and she said, boy, you don't finish nothing you start, I said,
Yeah.
well, I do, but this is something different. She said, well, I hope you finish this before I die,
Yes, yes, I love it.
I mean, she just, well, unfortunately, she died shortly after that. So I realized at that point, like we all do, that this thing called life is not a guarantee.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You have to do something with the talents and the gifts and the opportunities that you have, such as what they are.
Yes.
That was what inspired me to see what I could do to find out about what do you have to do. So I got into getting an editor and getting it published and
Yes, I
getting
got you. I got you.
pictures and art and graphics and detail and verifying the stories. And once I finished it, come to find out, the United States Army, the military was interested because of how I connected the dots.
Yeah.
The Jewish community was interested because one of the things I found out about was that when they liberated the concentration camps, the white soldiers did the liberating, but the black soldiers did the cleanup and the burial details. There was nothing in any history book to talk about that.
Oh, really? Hold on. What? Explain that. What do you mean?
Well, what happened
It was some that. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
during the Holocaust, the Germans decided that the best way to make a better society was to eliminate all the Jews, all the gypsies, anything that they figured was a pariah on society. We're not paying any special services for special needs people, and we don't trust the Jewish people. So they opted to try and kill between 4 and 6 million Jews.
Right.
And nobody found that out until towards the end of the war when they started to liberate all of these towns and these areas. So, as my father's unit was a black unit attached to white units, his unit was assigned to guard the guards that guarded the concentration camps. So, in the book, I talk about how he had to save the lives of black soldiers who were not paying attention one time and they let their weapons lie next to the barbed wire fence that was close to where these German soldiers were. They're going to take these rifles and shoot the black soldiers and take over the camp. But he was
Oh,
able
I
to stop
see.
them. So nobody had written about the fact that these black soldiers, once they got to these huge camps, they had to dig these big trenches and bury them in mass graves. So they did the trench digging, they did the burials, and they guarded the guards that guarded these Jews and gypsies and seniors and people from that they closed down all of these small towns and small villages. So this book is
Hold
no.
on, but that ain't a good thing. These guys had committed all these atrocities, and you guarding them for
Well,
whatever punishment is coming
they
next.
had to determine who they were and how they were going to be tried for war crimes.
Yeah,
So
I
a
got
lot of them were shipped out to prisons and to, because at the time they didn't have any prisons. So they used old army camps and Air Force camps so they could keep them away from the population. So they had barbed wire around, and then they had guards stationed around the barbed wire so that if they tried to escape, it was an automatic
you.
death
I
sentence.
got you. I got
So
you.
shot these guys, these white Germans, and I found out there was no record of how many guys they shot and killed. They just said, "Hey, you know, we we're just going to waste them because they killed some. They could not be in society anymore after watching killing people for 4 or 5 years. So
Oh, I got
yeah, they killed people every kind of way you can think of. Put them in ovens, and so consequently, that was what my father saw the results of these prison camp people and these soldiers that guarded them and killed them.
yeah, I
So
got you. I got you.
in the book, I talk about on their arms, on their forearms, concentration camp victims have numbers, and these numbers designate what city they came from, maybe their date of birth, and the type of experiment that they were going to run, and how they were going to be killed. So consequently, when my father came back, he said, "I will never ever have tattoos."
Yeah. I got you. I got
He
you.
would never have a tattoo because he never wanted a government to know that much about you, where they
Yeah.
could look at a number on your arm and determine how they were going to treat you. So now it's amazing now because tattoos are considered art.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Sure. Sure. Let me ask you this. What? And you've alluded to it. I'm sure the concentration camp. But is there something else that in your research that just blew your mind?
Yeah, one was the number of soldiers that came back, the number of black soldiers that served, and the number of soldiers who had terrific credentials to apply to the building of the country, and they weren't given jobs. That kind of blew my mind. That to know that. Like I said, they just ended up some of them in education, some post office, most ended up in the auto industry or in
Yeah.
agriculture.
But you did allude to, and I've heard this before. I guess one of the things that the government did do was that GI Bill. That did help black people.
Yeah, the GI Bill. They were able to go to school. They were able to get a house under the GI Bill. Matter of fact, in Detroit, if you look around the city, they have what they call A-frame bungalows. They're small houses, 2 bedroom, and they all look alike all over the city. And they allowed the soldiers to be carpenters and plumbers and roofers and concrete people to pour driveways. They built 10,000 of these little 2 bedroom houses all over the city in 4 years. Right after the war, 45 to 49, they built 10,000 homes in Detroit alone. And as they started to expand further east and west, the houses got a little larger. The facade, the fronts or whatever had brick on them. But everywhere you look, you can see these houses that were built in the late 40s and early 50s.
Oh,
They're
I
called
see.
A-frame bungalows. Little bungalow houses might have 2 bedrooms downstairs, or maybe a bedroom upstairs in the dormer,
Okay.
and one bath and a kitchen.
Oh,
And that's how they were able to make money in, but they were doing the, carting of the supplies. They weren't necessarily the plumbers and the carpenters and electricians.
okay,
But
I got
that's
you.
how they made money when they came back, and
Uh,
those are the pieces that they sold in the GI Bill, but they sold them to white soldiers, former soldiers first.
oh, really? Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you so very much. What is the and the name of the book and how people can get it? Let's promote the book.
Okay. The book is called No Medals, and it's written by me, Peter Banks. All you have to do is Google No Medals, and it'll come up on your phone, your smartphone, and say Peter C. Banks, author. And it's available. You can find it on Amazon, Amazon Books, the publisher, iUniverse.com. You can get it on Kindle Books, Google Books, or Kobo.com. So all you got to do is put the name in there and then type in, where can I get it?
Yes.
And it'll show up. And then you can pick it up. It comes in a hardcover or a soft cover and an ebook. So you can just download it to your smart device or onto your laptop or your computer, and you can read it.
And I would suspect, I'm taking liberties, people can contact you for speaking engagements, right?
You
If
can
you want to
contact
talk
me for
about
speaking engagements.
you have a website?
You can get me on my website,
Yeah.
peterb630 at yahoo.com, or at Gmail, petercb@gmail.com. Repeating that, peterb630 at yahoo.com, or petercb@gmail.com. And then you can contact me and we'll set it up anywhere. I've been all over the country because of how it connects the dots with families. And it also reveals a lot of the history that people didn't know, as you mentioned earlier. They're trying to cover that up. And some of it was never written about.
Yes.
So, but yeah, you can contact me, and it's becoming a recommended read for high school, junior high, and the first 2 years of maybe college reading. Yes. So it's sort of a supplementary read to connect you with the black soldiers of World War II and the laws and, as I said, laws, regulations, policies, and procedures that changed in the military. So it's a great, maybe a book for your aunt, your uncle, your granddad, because it gives you kind of a roadmap how to go about getting a medal, how to go about searching to find out about it, and what the medals mean.
Oh, I got you. I love it. I love it. Well, hey, thank you so very much, brother man, for coming on Strong Inspirations and sharing that with me. I'm excited that I ran into you. We bumped shoulders and clapped hands when we saw each other at the supermarket, but I didn't know that this was what was going to come as a result of that occurrence. Everybody, get a copy of that book. Tell somebody about that book who want to know of, let's call it, the injustice that happened to those soldiers, and how they still, as in his father's case, came back with sound mind, body, and became a productive citizen in America, and a loving family man, and provided for his family, and his kids have taken that mantle. And then this gentleman here writing the book so that you can hear the mantle that they've taken and from which it came from. Check me out, everybody. Strong Inspirations. Hit the subscribe button. It's free. We don't ask no information. Hit the like button on this video because I know you like this. There's no question about that. And like I say, and then everybody get a copy of my book. Wait for my movie coming out soon. They did it. And to you, my brother, I say this, and I mean this with all sincerity. I really do. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind, keep doing what you're doing. If you find another story, take less than 10 years, but get it out there because you're a prolific writer. You're on to something that maybe you didn't know you was intended to do. But this right here has led in your mission to get this story out. So I thank you for coming on Strong Inspirations. And it sounded like you know some German. Can you close us out with a goodbye in German? Do you know that?
I wish I could. The best I can say is, stay healthy, happy, and be productive and safe.
There
Safe
you go.
travels to everybody.
Everybody, we out. Thank you so very much. It's strong inspirations, but we give it to you straight, no chasing. Thank you.